The year was 2087 and Earth was no longer Earth anymore. The planet had fallen under the control of the Shadaloo Collective, a powerful alien empire that had arrived 50 years ago with weapons and technology that made human resistance seem almost childish. Most humans had accepted their fate. They worked in the massive factories built by the aliens, lived in the underground cities that had been constructed for them, and tried their best to survive another day. But there were some who refused to accept this new world. Some who still believed that humanity could be free. Ryu was one of those people. He was a young man, only 25 years old, with dark eyes that seemed to hold an ancient kind of determination. He had grown up in the resistance tunnels, learning martial arts from a master named Thomas who had taught him that the human spirit was the most powerful weapon in the universe. Thomas was old now, with gray hair and wrinkled skin, but his mind was still sharp. He had seen the rise and fall of governments, had witnessed the arrival of the aliens, and had refused to give up hope. When Ryu was just a child, Thomas had taken him under his wing and taught him everything he knew. The resistance headquarters was hidden deep beneath the city, carved into the old subway tunnels that nobody used anymore. It was a cramped place, with narrow corridors and small rooms lit by flickering lights. There were about 200 people living there, all of them dedicated to one goal, to find a way to overthrow the Shadaloo. They had tried for years to launch attacks, to sabotage the alien facilities, to inspire uprisings among the enslaved population. But nothing had worked. The aliens were too powerful, too organized, and too far ahead in technology. One afternoon, Thomas called Ryu into his small room. The old master sat on a simple chair and he looked worried. In his hands was a piece of paper, printed from an old machine that still worked despite the years. On it was written information about a tournament that the Shadaloo was organizing in the city of New Bangkok. The tournament would take place in a massive arena that the aliens had built, and it would bring together fighters from across the entire world. The message said that fighters could volunteer, and that the winner would be offered a position of honor in the Shadaloo military. "They want the strongest ones," Thomas said, his voice quiet and thoughtful. "That is what they always do. They find the best of us and they try to use us for their own purposes. They want to turn our greatest fighters into their soldiers." Ryu read the paper carefully. He had heard rumors about this tournament before, whispered conversations between resistance members who wondered if this could be a trap or an opportunity. "Master Thomas," Ryu asked, "do you think I should enter?" Thomas looked at his student for a long moment. He saw in Ryu something special, something that went beyond physical strength or fighting skills. Ryu had a kind of inner fire, a refusal to accept defeat that seemed to burn brighter than anything Thomas had seen in another human for a very long time. "There is something about you," Thomas finally said. "Something that the aliens do not understand. You have more than just strength. You have will. You have spirit. That is what makes you different from all the others." Ryu thought about this for many days. He knew that entering the tournament was dangerous. The aliens would be watching, studying the fighters, looking for threats to their power. But he also understood that this might be the only chance the resistance would ever get. If he could win, if he could prove that a human could defeat the Shadaloo's best warriors, then maybe people would believe that freedom was possible. Maybe they would rise up. Maybe they would finally fight back. He made his decision. He would go to the tournament. The journey to New Bangkok took 3 days. Ryu traveled alone through the abandoned parts of the city, moving through the old highways and the crumbling buildings that had been left behind when the aliens built their new structures. He wore his martial arts GI, the traditional white uniform that Thomas had given him years ago, and he carried nothing else. No weapons, no supplies, just himself and his training and his determination. When he finally arrived at New Bangkok, he was amazed by what he saw. The city was built on multiple levels, with the aliens living in tall towers at the top and the humans living in cramped apartments below. The Coliseum where the tournament would be held was the biggest building Ryu had ever seen. It was carved directly into the bedrock, with massive stone walls and enormous doorways. Thousands of people were arriving from all over the world. Ryu registered for the tournament in a small office filled with alien officials sitting behind desks. They looked at him with cold, distant eyes as they took his information. They did not seem to think that a young man from the resistance tunnels would be any kind of threat. They probably thought he would lose in the first round. In the waiting area for the fighters, Ryu met people from all walks of life. There was a tall man named Victor who had been a soldier before the aliens came. There was a woman named Linda who had been a gymnast and now used her flexibility in combat. There was a man named David who was quiet and serious, with the bearing of someone who had seen too much violence. There was also a man named Kenneth, who everyone called Ken, who wore expensive clothes and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never had to struggle for anything. Ken came from the upper levels of the city, where the humans who collaborated with the aliens lived in comfort. Ryu understood that all of these people had their own reasons for being here. Some, like Victor, wanted to prove something. Some, like Ken, wanted to gain power and status. Some, like Ryu, wanted to change the world. But they were all human, and they were all about to enter the arena together. The night before the tournament began, Ryu could not sleep. He sat in his small quarters and thought about his master, about the resistance, about all the people who were counting on him even if they did not know it. He thought about the future that he wanted to create, a world where humans could be free, a world where children like him would never have to grow up in tunnels hiding from alien overlords. When the morning came and the guards came to take the fighters to the arena, Ryu stood up and walked toward his destiny. He did not know if he would win. He did not know if he would survive. But he knew that he would fight with everything he had, with all the strength and all the spirit that Thomas had taught him to cultivate. As he walked through the corridors toward the arena, he could hear the roar of the crowd in the distance, and he knew that something important was about to begin. The arena was like nothing Ryu had ever seen before. It was enormous, with walls made of smooth stone that seemed to reflect light in strange ways. Massive screens hung from the ceiling, each one displaying fighters in brilliant colors of blue and red and gold. The seats were packed with thousands of spectators. Some were humans who had been brought here by the Shadaloo to watch the entertainment. Some were aliens sitting in special boxes high above the crowd, their silver skin gleaming under the bright lights. The air was thick with excitement and tension, and it smelled like sweat and metal and fear. When Ryu walked into the arena for his first fight, the crowd made a sound like a wave crashing against rocks. He looked small compared to the massive stone pillars that held up the ceiling. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena, speaking in several languages at once. Ryu could hear his own name being called, and he heard the name of his opponent. Victor. Victor was waiting in the center of the arena. He was a large man with broad shoulders and thick arms. His face was scarred from years of fighting, and he moved with the careful precision of someone who had been trained by the military. When he saw Ryu, he smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who did not believe his young opponent would last more than a few seconds. They bowed to each other as was the custom, and then the fight began. Victor attacked first, moving forward with heavy footsteps and throwing powerful punches. Ryu could see the experience in every movement, the strength that came from years of disciplined training. But Ryu did not try to match Victor's power. Instead, he moved to the side, letting Victor's fist pass through empty air. He responded with quick, precise strikes that came from angles that Victor did not expect. The crowd began to make noise. At first, they were cheering for Victor, the experienced fighter. But as Ryu continued to move and strike with grace and accuracy, some of them began to cheer for him instead. The young man with the simple white GI seemed to understand something about fighting that Victor had forgotten. Ryu was not trying to overpower his opponent. He was trying to understand him, to learn his patterns, to find the spaces between his defenses. After nearly 10 minutes of intense fighting, Victor made a mistake. He threw a punch that left his side exposed for just a moment. Ryu saw it and struck with precision, his open hand hitting Victor's ribs with enough force to knock the air from his lungs. Victor fell to one knee, breathing heavily. When Victor stood up, he looked at Ryu with new eyes. He did not look angry. He looked like he understood something that he had not understood before. He nodded to Ryu, and Ryu helped him to his feet. The crowd cheered loudly. Even though Victor had lost, there was respect between the two fighters. This was what the best fights were supposed to be about, many people thought. Not just winning but growth. Not just defeat but understanding. Between fights, the fighters were taken to a rest area beneath the arena. It was cool down there and dark, lit only by electric lights that the Shadaloo had installed. Ryu sat alone and thought about his fight with Victor. He thought about how the man had taught him something without meaning to teach him. Every fight, Ryu realized, was a conversation between two fighters. And if you listened carefully enough, you could learn from your opponent. His next 3 fights came in rapid succession. He fought a woman named Linda who was incredibly fast and flexible. She was difficult to hit because she seemed to bend in impossible ways. But Ryu learned that speed could be predicted if you watched carefully enough. He fought a man named Robert who had been modified by the Shadaloo, his muscles artificially enhanced. But Ryu discovered that the enhancement made Robert slower to adapt, less able to change his patterns. And he fought a young man named David who was quiet and serious and very skilled. That fight lasted the longest, and when Ryu finally won, both fighters were exhausted and covered in sweat. After each victory, Ryu felt something growing inside him. It was not just confidence, although he felt that too. It was a kind of understanding about human potential, about what the body and mind could accomplish when they worked together. Then came the fight that changed everything. Ken was waiting in the arena, and he looked different from the other fighters. His movements were precise and powerful. His eyes were cold and calculating. When he saw Ryu, he smiled and said, "So you are the tunnel rat that everyone is talking about. The one from the underground. I have heard about you." Ryu said nothing. He simply bowed. The fight between Ryu and Ken was nothing like his previous battles. Ken was faster than Victor. He was stronger than Linda. He had the precision of David and the power of Robert, all combined into one fighter. Ken attacked with devastating strikes that came from every direction. He had been trained by the best teachers that the Shadowloo's technology and money could buy. He had every advantage that privilege and power could give him. But Ryu had something else. He had the training of Thomas, the old master who had taught him that strength came from the spirit, not from external power. He had the hunger of someone who fought not for glory or wealth, but for something greater. He had the will of a person who believed that change was possible, that the future could be different from the present. The fight lasted longer than any of Ryu's previous matches. They exchanged blows for nearly 15 minutes, and the crowd grew louder and louder with each passing moment. Some people were shouting Ken's name. Others were shouting Ryu's. The arena itself seemed to vibrate with the energy of the two fighters. In the final moment, Ryu saw an opening that Ken had left. It was small, barely a gap, but it was there. Ryu struck with all the speed and precision he had learned, and Ken fell to the ground. He did not get back up. When Ryu helped Ken to his feet, the other man looked at him differently. Ken's eyes were no longer cold. They held something new. It was respect. It was the beginning of understanding. The crowd roared so loudly that Ryu could barely hear himself think. He had won 5 fights. He had advanced further than anyone expected. And somewhere in the high seats, an alien official named Guile was watching carefully, making notes, and wondering if this young human might be more important than anyone realized. After his victory over Ken, Ryu was taken to a special holding area beneath the arena. It was not like the common fighter's quarters where he had stayed before. This room was more comfortable, with soft beds and actual furniture, but it felt more like a prison than a reward. The walls were smooth and white, and there were cameras in every corner. Ryu understood that he was being watched constantly now. The Shadowloo was interested in him. He was alone in the room, sitting on the edge of the bed and thinking about his next fight, when the door opened quietly. Ryu's instincts immediately went on alert. His hand moved toward a defensive position. But when he saw who entered, he hesitated. It was a woman wearing a Shadowloo uniform. She had sharp features and piercing blue eyes, and her blonde hair was cut short. Her name, he would learn, was Cammy. She moved with the grace of a trained fighter, and she was careful to keep her hands visible and unthreatening. "Do not be afraid," Cammy said quietly. "I am not here to hurt you." Ryu remained tense. Everyone who wore the Shadowloo uniform was an enemy. Everyone who served the aliens had made a choice to help them, and that choice meant they were against the resistance. "Why are you here?" Ryu asked. Cammy looked at the cameras in the corners of the room, and then she did something unexpected. She walked over to a small panel on the wall and pressed a button. A light turned red and then green. "The cameras are off now," she said. "I have limited time, so I need to tell you something important. Something that could change everything." She sat down across from Ryu, and there was something in her expression that suggested she was taking a great risk by being here. "The tournament is not what you think it is," Cammy said. "It is not about finding soldiers or giving rewards to fighters. It is about harvesting." Ryu felt cold suddenly, as if ice water had been poured through his veins. "Harvesting? What do you mean?" Cammy took a deep breath. She had clearly made the decision to tell him this a long time ago, and now she was finally doing it. The Shadowloo wants to create a perfect army. An army of soldiers that will never question orders, never feel fear, never try to escape. They plan to take the consciousness of the strongest fighters in this tournament, the ones who make it to the final rounds, and they plan to upload your minds into machines. Your thoughts, your memories, your personalities, all of it will be copied and placed into artificial bodies that can be controlled through a neural link. Commander Bison will be able to command an entire army of perfect soldiers, all sharing a single connection to his mind. There will be no free will. There will be no choice. Just obedience. Ryu wanted to stand up, wanted to run, wanted to do something. But he could not move. The information was too shocking, too terrible. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Why would you betray your own organization?" Cammy's face changed then. For a moment, her sharp features softened, and Ryu could see that she was deeply sad. "Because I was like them once," she said quietly. I was chosen by the Shadaloo when I was very young. They took me from my family and trained me to be the perfect soldier. They gave me enhancements, technology in my body that makes me faster and stronger than normal humans. I did not know any better. I thought it was an honor. I thought I was serving something greater than myself. But then I watched you fight. I watched you refuse to break, refuse to accept that you were inferior, refuse to give up even when you were exhausted and hurt. And I realized something. I realized that what I gave up was more important than what I gained. She stood up and walked to the door. There is a man named Guile, she continued. He works as a Shadaloo official, but he is actually a resistance commander. He will be watching you in the next rounds. There is also a woman named Chun-Li. She came here as a fighter, but she is actually an operative for the resistance. She lost her sister to Shadaloo experiments, and she has been searching for information about where the other victims are being held. When you have a chance, talk to them. Trust them. Together, you might be able to do something that I never had the strength to do. Before Ryu could say anything, Cammy pressed the button again and the cameras returned to their normal state. She left the room without saying goodbye. That night, Ryu could not sleep. He thought about everything Cammy had told him. He thought about the people whose consciousness might be stolen and copied into machines. He thought about how many fighters might die or disappear in the coming weeks. And he thought about what he needed to do. In the morning, during the training time that fighters were allowed, Ryu met Guile in the practice area. Guile was a large man with a military bearing and a long scar running down his left cheek. His movements were precise and controlled, like someone who had spent decades learning how to fight. When Guile saw Ryu, he seemed to understand immediately. Without speaking, Guile led him to a quiet corner of the practice area, and they had a short conversation while appearing to simply stretch and exercise. Guile confirmed everything that Cammy had said. He also told Ryu that the resistance was planning something, but they needed more information. They needed to know exactly where Bison was keeping the harvested consciousnesses. They needed to understand the technology that the Shadaloo was using. And they needed Ryu to continue winning, to make it to the championship round, because that was where they would have their best chance to strike. Later that same day, Ryu met Chun-Li. She was training alone in one of the side arenas and she moved like water, her kicks powerful and precise. When she saw Ryu watching, she did not seem surprised. She simply nodded to him and motioned for him to join her. They sparred for a while and through their movements they communicated. Chun-Li knew about the harvesting plan. She knew about Cammy's defection. And she was ready to fight. But then something unexpected happened. A fourth fighter approached them. His name was Marcus and he had a charming smile and an easy way of talking to people. He said he wanted to join their group, to help the resistance from within the tournament. Ryu felt something was wrong but he could not prove it. So they agreed to let Marcus join them. It was only later that Ryu learned the truth. Marcus was a spy. He reported everything to the Shadaloo officials. When it came time for Marcus to fight Ryu, the spy fought with vicious intent, trying not just to win but to cripple Ryu so severely that he could no longer continue in the tournament. But Ryu was expecting treachery, and he was able to defeat Marcus, though it was the hardest fight of his life so far. When Marcus fell, his body was broken, and he was carried away by medical workers. Ryu never saw him again. As Ryu left the arena after that brutal match, he understood that the stakes had changed. This was no longer just about winning fights. This was about survival. This was about stopping an evil plan. This was about saving humanity. The semi-final rounds began on a cold morning when the temperature beneath the arena seemed to drop even lower than usual. Ryu had recovered from his brutal fight with Marcus, though his body still ached in places he did not know could hurt. His ribs were wrapped tightly beneath his GI, and there was a bandage on his left shoulder where Marcus had torn the skin with a particularly vicious strike. But Ryu had won, and that was what mattered. He was still alive, still in the tournament, and still moving toward whatever destiny awaited him. His first opponent in the semifinals was a man named Vega. Vega was not human. He was an alien, one of the pure-blooded members of the Shadaloo elite, and he had never fought a human in direct combat before. His skin was pale and almost translucent, with a faint crystalline quality that caught the light in strange ways. His movements were fluid and graceful, like someone moving through water. When he looked at Ryu, there was something in his expression that suggested he found the entire situation amusing. "So this is the human that everyone has been talking about," Vega said, his voice like wind whistling through ice caves. "I have studied recordings of your fights. You move with some skill, I suppose. But you should understand that you are fighting something beyond your comprehension now. I have been alive for 300 years. I have fought in wars across a dozen planets. You are a child playing with weapons you do not understand." Ryu said nothing. He simply bowed and took his fighting stance. The fight was unlike anything Ryu had experienced before. Vega's movements were not like the movements of human fighters. They were unpredictable in a completely different way. The alien seemed to move in directions that human joints could not bend, to strike from angles that should have been impossible. For the first several minutes, Ryu could barely defend himself. He was simply trying to survive, trying to understand the pattern in Vega's seemingly random attacks. But then something changed. Ryu realized that Vega's confidence was actually a weakness. The alien fighter was so convinced of his own superiority that he was not taking the fight seriously. Vega was playing with Ryu, drawing out the fight for entertainment rather than trying to end it quickly. This was the opening that Ryu needed. Ryu stopped trying to match Vega's speed and unpredictability. Instead, he fought a patient fight, defending carefully and striking only when he could see clear openings. He used his knowledge of human psychology against his alien opponent. He let Vega think he was winning, that the human was tiring and weakening. And when Vega became overconfident, when he moved in too close expecting an easy victory, Ryu struck with explosive force. The strike caught Vega across the face, and for the first time the alien's expression changed. He looked shocked, almost confused. Ryu did not hesitate. He continued his assault, using speed and precision to overwhelm Vega's defenses. Within moments the alien fell. The crowd made a sound like an explosion. Thousands of humans cheered. Even some of the alien observers seemed stunned. A pure-blooded member of the Shadaloo elite had been defeated by a human. It was something that many of them had not believed was possible. Ryu helped Vega to his feet, and the alien looked at him with something that might have been respect. "You are indeed remarkable," Vega said quietly. "Perhaps my people have underestimated your kind." The second semi-final fight came 3 days later. Ryu's opponent was a man named Balrog, and Balrog was human but only partially. His body had been extensively modified by Shadaloo technology. His right arm was metallic, glowing with soft blue light. His left leg had been replaced with a machine that hissed and clicked with each movement. Metal plates had been inserted beneath his skin, making him stronger and faster than any natural human could be. When he entered the arena, he did not walk like a man. He moved like a machine wearing human skin. "I was like you once," Balrog said to Ryu, his voice distorted by the machinery in his throat. "I was human. I was weak. Then I accepted the gift of the Shadaloo. They made me strong. They made me powerful. And now I am so much more than I ever could have been as a natural human." Ryu could see sadness in Balrog's eyes, even though his expression was hard. This man had given up something precious in exchange for power. He had become something other than human, and even though he possessed strength that Ryu could not match through natural means, he had lost something that could not be replaced. The fight was different from the one with Vega. Balrog was stronger and faster than Ryu in almost every way. The mechanical parts of his body gave him advantages that no amount of training could overcome. Ryu was knocked down repeatedly. Blood ran from his nose and mouth. His vision blurred from impacts to his head. But Ryu noticed something that others might have missed. The machinery in Balrog's body was not perfect. It sometimes stuttered. Sometimes the mechanical parts hesitated for just a fraction of a second before responding to Balrog's commands. These moments were rare, but they were there. Ryu fought a careful, strategic battle. He was not trying to overpower Balrog. He was studying the machine, learning its patterns, waiting for the moments when the technology failed. When he finally saw a clear opening, Ryu moved with all the speed and precision he could gather. His strike targeted the junction point where Balrog's mechanical arm connected to his shoulder. The impact was precise enough to overload the circuits. The arm went dark and ceased to function. Balrog dropped to one knee, and Ryu saw something change in his opponent's expression. For a moment, Balrog was simply a man again, not a machine wearing human skin. When Ryu helped him up, Balrog looked directly into his eyes. "Thank you," the man said quietly. "You reminded me that I am still human." Now only one fight remained. The championship match. The final battle. Everything had been leading to this moment. Commander M. Bison himself entered the arena. The alien was massive, nearly 8 feet tall, with skin like polished steel and eyes that glowed with cold intelligence. He wore a uniform covered in symbols of conquest, each one representing a world that the Shadaloo had subjugated. His presence alone seemed to make the air heavier, as if gravity itself increased when he was near. "I have been watching you," Bison said, and his voice was like distant thunder. "You are remarkable for a human. You have defeated 3 of my finest warriors. You have shown skills and determination that I did not think your species possessed. Perhaps I have made an error. Perhaps humanity is more than I believed. Ryu stood in the center of the arena, and he felt the weight of the moment. Behind him, he knew, were the humans in the crowd. Below him were his friends and allies who had risked everything to bring him to this point. And somewhere far away were the people of Earth, all of them hoping that something would change, that somehow a young man from the underground tunnels could make a difference. I fight for my people, Ryu said simply. And I will not stop. Bison smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had never truly been challenged before. Then let us see what you are truly made of. The battle began. The fight between Ryu and Bison was like nothing the arena had ever witnessed. The alien commander moved with incredible speed and power, his strikes coming from every direction, each one capable of crushing bone. Ryu was knocked down repeatedly. His body absorbed blow after blow, and there were moments when he wondered if he could possibly survive. Blood dripped from cuts across his face and arms. His breath came in ragged gasps. His muscles screamed with pain and exhaustion. But Ryu did not give up. Every time Bison knocked him down, Ryu stood up again. Every time the alien commander seemed to have won, Ryu found a way to defend or counter. The crowd became quieter as the fight continued, the energy shifting from excitement to something else. It was as if the entire arena was holding its breath, waiting to see if a human could possibly survive against something so powerful and alien. Bison began to fight with growing frustration. He was used to opponents who broke quickly, who surrendered when they realized they could not win. But Ryu would not break. Ryu would not surrender. The human kept fighting even when every logical part of his brain was screaming at him to stop, to accept defeat, to give in to the superior power of the alien commander. You are fascinating, Bison said, pausing for a moment to catch his breath. You refuse to accept reality. You refuse to accept that you are inferior. This is admirable, I suppose, but ultimately pointless. I will crush you. It is not a question of if, only of when. Ryu stood there, battered and bleeding, and he understood something in that moment. Bison was right about one thing. Ryu could not defeat the alien commander through strength alone. The alien was simply too powerful. But Ryu realized that strength was not the only thing that mattered. Deep inside Ryu's body, in the very structure of his DNA, something ancient began to wake up. It was something that had been placed there long ago, before the Shadowloo came, before the aliens discovered Earth. It was a gift left by an ancient human civilization, an insurance policy against the day when something greater than humans would threaten their existence. Psychic energy began to flow through Ryu's body. It was silver in color, bright like moonlight, and it seemed to come from somewhere deep within his core. The energy moved through his muscles and bones, giving him strength he had never known before. It moved through his mind, giving him clarity and focus. And it moved through his spirit, filling him with a power that transcended the physical. The crowd gasped. Some of the alien observers stood up from their seats. Even Bison took a step back, his expression changing from confidence to something that might have been concern. With this new power flowing through him, Ryu moved differently. His strikes became faster and more precise. His defense became impenetrable. He was no longer just a human fighting an alien. He was something more. He was the manifestation of human potential, of the ancient legacy that his species carried within itself. The final exchange came suddenly. Bison launched one last devastating attack, trying to end the fight with a single overwhelming blow. But Ryu was ready. He moved to the side with perfect timing, and as Bison's strike passed through empty air, Ryu struck with all the power of his body and all the energy of his awakened potential. His fist connected with Bison's chest, and the impact sent the alien commander flying backward. Bison crashed into the arena wall with enough force to crack the stone. He did not get up. For a moment there was complete silence. Then the arena erupted. Thousands of voices screamed and shouted and cheered. Humans in the crowd were crying, some from joy and some from the sheer overwhelming emotion of the moment. The resistance members who had infiltrated the arena stood and threw their fists into the air. Even some of the alien observers seemed uncertain how to react. But the celebration did not last long. Alarms suddenly blared throughout the arena. Red lights flashed from the ceiling. The voice of a computer announcer spoke in several languages, declaring an emergency. Bison's defeat had triggered security protocols throughout the Shadowloo facility. The aliens were moving to contain the situation, to prevent the information about Bison's loss from spreading to the enslaved human population. Guile appeared suddenly in the fighters' quarters, moving quickly through the corridors. He found Ryu as the young fighter was being escorted by medical workers. "We have to move," Guile said urgently. "Now. This is our chance." Chun-Li joined them in the tunnels beneath the arena. She had explosives and she knew the layout of the Shadaloo facility better than anyone. "The main command center is on level 7, she said. "If we can reach it, we can broadcast Bison's defeat to every human in the city. Once people know that an alien commander can be defeated, everything will change." Ken appeared as well, the privileged human from the surface levels who had become something more through his fights with Ryu. He brought with him a group of humans from the upper city who had been waiting for a signal, waiting for proof that resistance was possible. Cammy guided them through the passages, using her knowledge of Shadaloo security to disable cameras and bypass locked doors. They moved through the facility like ghosts, fighting when they had to, hiding when they could. The resistance members they encountered along the way seemed to understand immediately what was happening and joined the cause. Within hours, what had started as a small group had become something much larger. When they finally reached the main command center, it was defended by alien soldiers and human collaborators. But the resistance was fighting with a kind of fierce determination that could not be stopped. Every step forward cost them, but they advanced nonetheless. And then, finally they broke through. Chun-Li's hands moved across the alien computer system. She did not fully understand the technology, but she understood the basic principles. Within minutes the broadcast was live. Across every screen in the city, across every communication channel, the image of Ryu defeating Commander Bison was shown. The young human fighter standing victorious in the arena, with the alien commander lying defeated on the ground. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. In the factories, workers stood up and stopped working. In the housing blocks, people emerged from their apartments. In the tunnels, the resistance fighters felt the shift in the atmosphere, the sudden understanding that change was possible. Humans began to rise up. Not in organized military attacks, but in waves of humanity, simply refusing to obey anymore, simply walking away from their assigned duties. The Shadaloo was not prepared for this. They had dealt with organized resistance movements. They had dealt with military threats. But they had never dealt with the simple, unstoppable force of an entire population that had decided at the same moment that they would no longer accept enslavement. Bison, recovered from his defeat, made a desperate decision. He triggered the self-destruct sequence for the arena and the command center, planning to take as many humans as possible with him into death. But Cammy saw what he was doing. She moved with the speed of her training and pulled Ryu clear of the blast zone. Guile grabbed Chun-Li. Ken helped other fighters escape. And they all ran through the corridors as the facility collapsed behind them. They emerged into the light of dawn as the Shadaloo fleet began to withdraw from Earth's orbit. The alien ships rose into the sky, leaving behind a planet forever changed. In the days that followed, Ryu walked through the city with Thomas, his old master. They walked through the streets that were beginning to rebuild, through the spaces where humans were emerging from underground to see the sun. Children played in the streets for the first time in their lives, free and unafraid. "You did it," Thomas said simply, his old eyes filled with tears of joy. "We did it," Ryu replied. "All of us together." They never understood that. The aliens thought humans were weak because we are individual. But we are strong because we can come together. We are strong because we can believe in something greater than ourselves. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Ryu felt the strange psychic power within him settling, becoming quiet again. It did not matter. The power had served its purpose. Humanity had been awakened, and no force in the universe could put that awakening to sleep again.